Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. My name is Patricia Kong, and I am your guest host today. So recently, professional Scrum trainer Todd Miller and I spoke on the Scrum.org webcast, actually on March 23rd, 2023, if you're going to look it up. And it was called Engaging Stakeholders and Management with Evidence-Based Management, EBM. So that was about concepts you can use to develop your own dashboard of information to proactively engage upper management and stakeholders about the value of your product and the capability of your team. And Todd and I were doing that because we're actually doing a project together, and a lot of the questions that we're seeing in organizations and teams and management is they're constantly almost in a defensive mode. And so it's fielding questions like, how's the team doing? What are you going to do to help your team? When can I have that? What have you achieved? How do you make decisions? Those kind of questions. So Todd and I are together today. Hello, Todd.
Hello, Patricia.
Because we actually received almost 100 questions during that webcast. So we're here to circle back on some of the open questions. So 100 questions. Todd, does that mean that the topic is popular or we didn't make sense?
I think maybe a combination. I'm hoping that this is a popular topic because this is really important to you and I specifically. I mean, you and I have talked about this since the day we met, like 7.5 years ago, right? This was like, I think the first conversation we had, and then it was like, hey, how's it going? I'm from Pennsylvania. And you're like, oh, I'm from Boston.
Yeah.
After like an hour of EBM talk. So hopefully it's interesting.
I think you were like, I'm so sick of getting beat up as a developer.
Yeah.
All right. So we did pull the questions. We obviously won't have time to go through all of them. But we hope that this adds a little bit more color to the conversation, and we're going to continue to do that. So let's start with the first question. Is EBM a mindset to do something, or is it an actual tool to get any result?
This is a pretty deep question, and I'm interested to hear your take on it. And my take, like maybe I'm just, I have the Scrum framework, thought process going in my head right now, where you have these 11 elements and they're accompanied by the Scrum values, which is a combination, like the Scrum framework is just that, a framework. So I guess you could view it as a tool, but without the appropriate mindset, it could be really done as we talk about zombie Scrum or mechanical Scrum. I think the same thing applies here to EBM, right? I think that with EBM, we have 3 levels of goals. We have the notion of empiricism embedded in there with the goals. And then we have the 4 KVAs, key value areas, accompanied by a measurement or several measurements under each, right? Which is the KVMs. So you could do that, but you could do that in a very mechanical way. Right. And so I think that EBM is a framework. So it is, I guess you could view it as a tool, but without the appropriate mindset, you may not get a result that you're expecting. What's your take, Patricia?
I agree. So I think all of these things, I mean, they're a way to achieve something. So EBM, Scrum, I think EBM, Scrum, when we talk about portfolio management, some of the stuff we're working on, it is very much almost just Scrum to me. The thing that EBM adds on to it is to say, and that was actually added to the Scrum framework, was about how do you know this is working? What's the success? What is that? The inspection and adaptation is that's the evidence that you're looking at. For me, the mindset is a part of everything we do. And I know you were talking about zombie mindset. What it makes me think about is one, you have to have the courage to actually do this. It can get you into trouble. You're going to have a different kind of conversation. But also, I can see that this could maybe be used for evil.
Yeah.
So, like, you could use it to have any conversation. Essentially, you could do that with any sort of data research and spin it. So, be mindful of what you're trying to do, and not push your way through by, it's like instead of ignoring what's there, it's almost manipulating the information to say what you want it to say, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, because you can really do that with data, can't you? You can really. One thing I've thought about quite a bit is how we all have our own narrative about a product, about life, everything. We all have our own narrative built in our heads, and you can manipulate data to meet your own narrative rather than change your narrative based off of the data that you're seeing. And so when we're talking about like objectiveness, and we're talking about measurement, we're talking about how you formulate goals and how people behave, it can be manipulated, which could lead us into a evil type scenario, right? Also the interpretation of it, right? Because the EVM guide is not a do it all, tell you how to do everything. So it can be interpreted and maybe implemented incorrectly. Maybe unintentionally, but the cause is pretty bad behavior and from a visceral reaction to how it's been implemented. So I think all those things are there. And, I can't help but think of mindset when I think of how you and I have been in situations where you're talking about these things and you're asking questions and people get very defensive. Right. The transparency that EVM can bring to you can sometimes put people in the defensive, which tells me there is mindset, right?
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Yeah, ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
I got this one. So what are the risks associated with implementing EVM, and how can we address them?
We just talked about how you can manipulate stuff. I think one of the risks, two of them. One, you are trying so hard to figure out the perfect measurements and the perfect goals that you never get started. That would be something that would be a risk to me. And that's the same thing with anything in life, I suppose. But it's just trying to, are we supposed to put down measurements for every KVA, or how about these? How can I make the perfect dashboard and all that stuff? And I've seen this. And I've worked with the companies that have done this. And I think in the webinar, we specifically, even like we were going down that path when we were talking about our experiences and what we could capture on the dashboards in the webcast. We were said, you know what, let's just put a couple things there. That's enough to have a conversation. So those are the risks that I think there are. There's of course others. What about you?
Yeah, I keep thinking that the evolution, right? The evolution of like you're saying, like this perfect setup, right? Let's implement evidence-based management using waterfall. Let's get everything right before we look at it. That's not a mentality you want to take. Just enough to get started is what you were mentioning. You were just mentioning. But after you get started, the evolution of it, right? To continue to work on writing better goals. We know that goal writing is hard. We see it all the time. We see it. We see the epic struggle of writing outcome-oriented goals in every organization, right? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop trying. Another thing I've seen too is just because you measured it at one point in time doesn't mean that it's necessary to measure it in the future. So I guess what I'm really getting at here is that your first take at the implementation becomes set in stone, and you fail to adapt the implementation and the process of evidence-based management as it goes on, right? So there is no built-in way for you to say that you're going to continuously improve your implementation of evidence-based management, but perhaps that should be something that you consider as you're building your product, or you're applying this to your organization or your portfolio. Is when do we look at and inspect our implementation of evidence-based management?
I think that does make it a way of thinking, doesn't it? It does make it like, because what you were just saying made me really think about how you don't need all this buy-in. Like if you just start thinking and asking good questions, you can get that. All right. So we probably have time for a few more questions. Okay. How do you prioritize your backlog or ideas with EVM to ensure that you aren't missing a higher value opportunity? Do you rate these on the 4 KVAs, key value areas, friends?
Yeah, this is a pretty deep question too. And here's the thing really for you to keep in mind on this is that everything that you have on a backlog or every idea you have is just a hypothesis of value. Uh, and no matter what, I mean, I know you and I talk about this quite a bit, Patricia, that we've had these ideas and have talked to customers about them and gotten really charged up about them. And then we go implement them and it doesn't bring any value, even though every indicator before told us it would. And I've also implemented things that I'm like, okay, well, this person asked for it, and let's just, it's a quick thing. Let's implement it, and it becomes wildly popular. Everything is a hypothesis, and that's where we can validate those hypotheses. But I don't think that anything is going to tell you exactly how to order your product backlog, the KVAs, the goals. There is some gut in here. What do you think?
So I agree with you that evidence-based management is not database management. Bring the information that you know. And I think if someone is trying to think about how can I look at the KVAs in terms of decisions, so obviously have your goal, but you are now, I think, asking a question about unrealized value, what you should pursue. And you can look at that with current value, right? Where you are. So where you are, what you want to pursue, that's going to help you make decisions. And then for me to balance it out, you do want to know your time to market and ability to innovate. And the reason I'm talking super abstractly is, let's say you're looking at some ideas, like Todd said, you're thinking about these all equally. Now what your job is to try to disprove or prove as quickly as possible. So you think about those outcomes. So now you're thinking about WIP, your ability to innovate. Now you're thinking about how fast can you actually realize value and see what actually starts moving things. And that might help someone think about their different ideas, but they really should understand from their experience and their own gut what might be the right decision there, or a better decision, right? You don't undermine your own experience, but also take the information you're receiving from the market pretty seriously. But that WIP thing is what I'm thinking about currently.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I mean, I like your tie in there to the time to market and ability to innovate, because if you're not shipping, or you're not being effective being shipping,
Right.
You might not be delivering anything. You probably
But
are
that's
delivering.
how you get into this is the most important thing we're going to work on this year.
Right. Yeah. And then suddenly 2 weeks later, it's not the most important thing anymore. Right. Cool.
Yeah. Or it's still important the next year and we don't know why. Yeah.
Yep. Should we, next question? Do you think we're good with that one?
Yeah.
How do you persuade C-suites that outcome is the starting point when they just want outputs?
So this question is a little bit, it's funny, yet it's a little bit loaded, because it's assuming that people in the C-suite aren't thinking about the outcome or don't think about goals and visions. And that might be an interesting starting point, is do they have, what is the vision of the company? What is the thing that we align on, right? If they're really just like, give me this, this, and this, it's really having that conversation with them, really on a leadership level. And C-suites have to make a lot of decisions, and they have a lot of accountability. Sometimes that's financial. There's a lot of risk there. So sometimes getting them to think about the vision and honestly just making a decision about what's more important to you will lead you slowly to the why is this important? How is this going to help us? Why? Because sometimes that reaction of just show me outputs is show me what we're getting done so that I know we're making progress. But usually if you dig a little bit, there's something that they're worried about or something that they really want to achieve. And that's a little bit probably more of coaching situation. So that's a softer way of entry. What about you, Todd?
This might be one of those where it's a cautionary tale to not maybe forge your way in, depending on your position in the organization, and go really hard at it out of the gate. I've made that mistake. That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
I gave the slow version. You give the violet version.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I think most C-suites got there because they are outcome oriented. I do think that we have an issue in a lot of organizations, though, where it is thou shalt do this, and without any consideration of the relevancy of it. So if it is an output oriented thing that executives are demanding, maybe you could get into the conversation by tying that output into what's actually happening, right? And say like, okay, this output produces, and try to do it in a really non-invasive way. That's because I think if you just go, barking about this, I think that you could get bit, right?
Yeah.
And rather, I think if you say, okay, so, and maybe ask the question, so this output that you're asking for, produce this thing, how does that tie into the customer? Maybe just start. I really like the idea of like centering and just asking customer or consumer related questions,
Yeah.
and then maybe building out from there. Start small and then move big.
Yeah, I like that. What I've done in the past is give them the outputs and then I come up with the outcome. So I just kind of do the work of thinking about the outcome and how I'm relating to it and making sense of it in my head. However, I think probably because it's the Todd and Patricia conversation, we would say if you are working in a company where they're just concerned about outputs, consider if you want to be there.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with that company? Is that something that interests you? And is that the sort of leadership that you think can guide you? So
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't know that we talk about that enough. If you feel like you're not having any influence into what those outputs are, and you desire having influence in them, and you've tried and you can't get it, maybe it's time to split.
I think that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
So that might lead us into this next conversation. Okay. Todd, who would you recommend be involved with developing what the goals are? Should we involve stakeholders in creating goals?
So I think that this is so contextual that like I want to make sure that I don't answer this like this is the exact way to do it, because right, so in Scrum we talk about a product owner, and a product owner that is responsible for product goals and visioning, right? And so from a Scrum perspective, which I think is okay to use here, I would say that the product owner drives this conversation. And as a product owner in the past, I really did like to involve stakeholders and team members in the creation of these, although I would maybe I would be heavily influencing it because I'm ultimately accountable. So I might show up and be like, here's my product goal that I'm thinking about activating after we retire this product goal. So in evidence-based management, we consider that maybe a intermediate goal, right? Something with a 3-month to 6-month time horizon, I think is what we said in the webinar. So I don't think it's a bad idea to have stakeholders involved, but if you're the person that is accountable for creating the goals, then what I would tell you is that make sure you come with your own path in mind. Now, intermediate tactical goals tend to be as the implementers that you're really heavily influencing, but generally there's somebody developing these goals. Is that fair, Patricia? Now I'm just like running on about it and thinking about it. What are your thoughts?
I think so. Should we involve people? So it's contextual for me on the level of goal, right?
Mm-hmm,
Because
mm-hmm.
like you said, you could, even if it was just a sprint goal or a tactical goal, or even, who's closest to that, they're going to know. So they have input, right? We have developers who are going to talk about how we're going to achieve this, the product goal, the stakeholder, the strategic goal, those bigger goals. I mean, if you want to make that by looking into a magic 8-ball, go ahead. But typically, it's kind of those ones where this decision is when you have, for me, it's about having input, learning, and then I make the decision. So that's kind of into decision theory. But I would think about the level of the goal and then what level of information do you feel comfortable with? If you do have someone just said who has the authority to be like, I made this goal, this is it. That's the answer also. But the accountability and the learning will be what's important. And I think another thing we should probably note is that goals can change.
Mhm, mhm.
And so that's it's not something that is set in stone, especially as they're further away, right? So we talked about that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize the point that you just made. So I'm going to re-emphasize it, Patricia.
Go for it. Go for it.
Is that depending on the level of goal and depending on how you're implementing evidence-based management would be how who you involve and who's involved. Like I think it's pretty, that might be a pretty important thing to clarify. Like if you're implementing evidence-based management at the portfolio, from the portfolio perspective, that could be substantially different than if you're implementing it on a product, right? So and who is accountable for what might be something interesting for you to explore and make pretty explicit. Might be, yeah. So I just want to emphasize that I think that's an important conversation.
All right. Let's do a couple more.
Next question. It's my turn?
Yes.
Okay. What is the best way? Another more about stakeholders. What is the best way to keep stakeholders and managers engaged in actual updates to keep them interested, especially during busy and pressured duties? So basically, the stakeholders are really, and managers are really busy. How do we keep stakeholders and managers involved in our evolution and our current implementation of evidence-based management?
Have a conversation. I think this is where in the webinar we kind of used the two different dashboards, and it was saying here's information radiator, let's use that as a tool to have a conversation. And so that's really where the updates, I don't know if it's like any different than how you would normally, like if you're using Scrum at the sprint review, you could show this information, you could have a conversation. Am I not thinking about this question correctly, Todd?
No, I think you definitely are. I don't think there's anything built into evidence-based management that tells you exactly how you engage your stakeholders. I think it's so contextual again, right? I think that centering around a time duration for immediate, intermediate, and strategic goals, like those time horizons, I think might give you indicators.
I think the thing that I would add is if you have, because I've dealt with this too, is if you have someone who's like, no, I want to know the velocity of the teams. Have that information ready, but have the other information you want to talk about to drive the conversation more, right? We're taking baby steps here. So I'd probably leave it at that. So I'm sorry if we didn't answer that well, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it.
I think it also would be important to say here that not all stakeholders you engage with the same. So there's different types of stakeholders. Like there's stakeholders that you want to constantly keep informed. And then there's stakeholders that it's okay to just occasionally keep them informed, right? And so I would probably start here by understanding who your stakeholders are and see if you can even categorize, like, I need to be in this person's office at least once a week, right?
Yes.
I need to,
such important like conversation around stakeholder management and who are your stakeholders. I don't know if teams do that enough, and to say who are my stakeholder, who thinks they're a stakeholder, but they're not. They just want to be kept apprised of our situation, for sure.
Yeah, and those stakeholders change.
Yes, good point. Okay. Oh, I like this one for you because it's different, and maybe we can end on this one. How can I measure the individual performance of team members? All these metrics and values will be team-wise, and one team member may not perform well, but they're going to take advantage of a good Scrum team. So I think that's saying you have like someone who's not performing, but they're in a team that is good, so it gets not, I don't know, they're not exposed that they suck.
So from my, so first of all, I I don't think that I know that in knowledge work that you cannot measure the individual performance of someone, because those metrics that you're using to measure the individual performance of somebody are going to get found out, and then will give you no relevancy into what those measures told you to begin with. So I think when it comes to measuring performance of a person, I think in knowledge work, it's impossible. Now, on a factory line, how quickly somebody is moving a gadget from point A to point B might be a measuring point, so that you can use some lean practices to cut that down. That is not at all applicable to knowledge and creative work. So let's just get the notion out of the way that there is possible to measure people work in knowledge work, because we're not robots and it's creative work. So maybe we could just cut that out. Is that fair? What do you think about that?
I like how, yeah, I like how you're delineating this from the type of work. So if we're in a type of work that requires a team of people to work together, and that work is somehow going to be influenced conversations, yes. If you have different type of work, like you're saying, it's a lot easier to see. Do they show up on time? Are they doing their job? That kind of thing. Right? Like the factory work you were talking about, or if you're working in something else, or they're just doing an individual job. I think it's another conversation if you have a team that is pointing out, hey, we have a team member who is not really stepping up. That's a conversation for the team to point out first, but that's not, hey, I'm going to track your individual performance. So it's a nice little conversation probably that segues into like some of the agile leadership stuff, agile management stuff. Who has that conversation, but who's telling you that they're a good Scrum team and that person is not performing would be something that I would think about. But that's not really where EBM is going to shine anything. Like I could do EBM on a person, but I can, a team using EBM or a team using EBM, teams using EBM on a product will be interesting, because the thing that you can start to look at, for instance, is a little bit around that ability to innovate. What are they doing? What's lacking? How are they being effective at achieving value? Is the Scrum Master helping them be effective at achieving value? Or is the Scrum Master focused on, just setting up little icebreakers all the time for them? I think about like, also, if are people having hard times working with those people? I would think about when a slot opens up on a team, does anybody want to join that team? Like those are other things I would think, a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah. I've also been in this circumstance where that there is a person that isn't keeping up with the rest of the team. And we're paying people, like we're professionals, right? And so if I feel that way, and I am a developer on the team, or I'm a person producing something, and I don't think that person is keeping up, I owe it to myself to have a conversation with that person, right? We can talk to people. We need to have that courage to be able to sit down, maybe as an individual one-on-one, and just say, is there something I can help you with, because you're hurting this team, right? And so, like, to me, I go back to this professional conversation where we don't need proxies to people. I wouldn't go to my manager without saying something to this person and calling it out. And then if that person still can't keep up, maybe then it is something that needs to be elevated. But I think we go out. I think you nailed it when you said this goes outside the bounds of evidence-based management, and we would really, really caution you around having individual performances under any caveat. In fact, I wouldn't even caution. I would say don't do it. But this is leadership stuff. This is how this stuff invokes. This is professionalism stuff. This is going to happen, right? You need to be equipped for this to happen, and use your traditional stuff in HR to cope with it. That's why HR is there.
Yeah, or your retrospective
yeah.
at the team level.
Yeah. But I circle sometimes I hear this stuff and I think to myself, like, are there just people out there that don't want to like go and say, hey, Patricia, can we have a chat? Or is there something I can help you with? It seems like you're struggling a bit, right? And I need to have that conversation. I can't just go straight to some authority and say that to me is weak. So I'll take a chance to say that.
All right. Well, thank you. So I like how you tied that back into the mindset and some values and professionalism. I think that's it. I hope this was helpful for everyone. If this was, and there's more of the questions that we should be answering, let us know. But thank you, and thank you, Todd, for taking this time today to do this.
Always good hanging out with you, Patricia.
Always. Okay, thank you.